Hi, everyone. Kelly here. Today I have Chaz from Chaz Clarinet Studio, and we are going to be talking about how he has added 14 new clarinet students in the last 5 months to his studio, all from organic outreach. And I'm really excited to talk about this today and have you go into a lot more detail, Chaz. So why don't I kick it over to you first? You're not just a teacher. Tell us a little bit more about you and your background and what you do in performance as well.
Sure, yeah. So my main full-time job is playing in the United States Army Band, based in Washington D.C. And so we're doing ceremonies and concerts throughout the area. Um, it's a it's a great job. It's a great performance job. It doesn't take up the whole 40-hour work week, so it usually amounts to 10 to 15 hours a week. So I had a lot of free time and started building sort of a small studio on the side, which is how we started working together.
Awesome. And when we met, I think we had about 6 students, correct?
Yes, yeah.
So you were teaching on a regular basis. This is something you were really excited about. And I remember in our initial conversations talking about how much you just really loved teaching, that this is something you were so excited about adding more students because it is a different part of you. What is it that attracts you to teaching? Since, I mean, you are an actor performer, and I think that does speak to a lot of musicians that you're balancing both parts. What is it about teaching that is so exciting or important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, I play in a band, and it's great. I love playing in the band. It's a great band, great musicians. But something that sort of is always at the back of my mind is, if I'm playing a concert, if they switched me out and someone else played, or if I wasn't there at all, the concert would be basically the same. The audience wouldn't know. Maybe the people next to me would know if it was somebody different, but just my impact on the product, the musical
Mm,
product, is so small that it's really just for my own. It feels like it was for my own pleasure and for just people around me. And in teaching, I feel like I have a lot more just independence and power to be creative and just have a much larger impact. And it also makes me feel like I'm a little bit more in touch with the community here. Just
mm.
feel like I'm getting to know families, I'm getting to know schools, and I'm getting to improve people's relationship with the clarinet, which is really fulfilling for me.
That's awesome. We always say when we're talking about our marketing, it's not your experience that someone is buying, right? It's the experience of working with you.
Mm.
So there are other teachers, but they're choosing you because they have an attachment to you or they're excited about working with you. And that's a really important piece of this. And so I think you're spot on there that not only is it really fulfilling, but it is so impactful. And that relationship that you built with the student is not just musical, and it's a fun part of what we do is building those personal relationships too. But I know your students are also really successful, so it's fun to see that growth for sure. If you were to highlight something that you think makes your studio or your teaching unique, what might that be?
Hmm. Let's see. Well, my studio is it's pretty diverse in
Mhm.
terms of age groups. Youngest students are in fifth grade. The oldest students I teach in college, so I teach college students as well. So it's definitely not that. I think my students just really enjoy playing the clarinet, and I try to really uh, get them to enjoy performing, get them to have a really positive relationship with the clarinet, so that the lessons are something they look forward to, band is something they look forward to, auditions they look forward to. That's the biggest thing that I try to instill in all my students.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it sounds like you give them a lot of support in those different opportunities so that they are performing and are taking auditions. And that's something you're encouraging too, which I know every studio has their focus and that's not the same for everyone. So it's fun for students to have those additional opportunities for sure. Jumping back to the very beginning. So just to kind of orient everyone to the timeline, we're talking about this kind of 5 month timeline and what we've done the last 5 months. We started working together at the very end of May and it's mid-October right now. So a little under 5 months. What was going on for you at that time in the studio? I know you were performing, things were kind of picking back up again, post shutdown, and we had a lot more performances coming. But what was frustrating you about your teaching and your studio building at that time?
Right. A lot of things. So at the time when we first started working together, yeah, I had 6 students or so. Um, and my studio was starting to grow. Before that, I was only teaching maybe 2 or 3 students regularly. And so I could feel my schedule becoming more and more full.
Mm,
And I had a couple of students who were not really taking weekly. Well, they were sort of taking weekly lessons, but we would just change the time every week. And so every week we're emailing back and forth about when we're gonna have lessons. And some weeks we'd have no lessons, some weeks we'd have 2 lessons. And everybody was submitting payments in a different form. So there was Venmo, there was PayPal, there was Zelle, and some people would submit them the day before the lesson. Some people would submit the day of the lesson. Some people would forget, and I'd have to go back through my Google Calendar to find out when I taught lessons in order to decide how much to bill them, which was just such a mess, looking back on it. And that was getting really frustrating because I would spend so much time just trying to piece together my schedule, and it really wasn't very much teaching, now that I think about it. So that was getting really frustrating, and I feel like I wanted to grow my studio, but the sort of systems weren't in place to hold more students. I didn't have a studio policy. I didn't have a way of scheduling students that was really efficient. I didn't have a really efficient way of handling payments, that kind of stuff. So that was the main reason that I sort of looked for you.
Well, and at that time too, not only is it frustrating, but you're looking at growing that studio, 3 times over. The goal was about 15 hours a week of teaching. We're teaching maybe about 6. So we're looking at
Mhm.
almost tripling the studio size. You can't triple the studio size and do all of that maintenance and billing and admin work because you don't have the time. You are also performing. You have to practice for the gigs. You have other things going on that would take a lot of your time. And if we're spending all that energy on enforcing policies or trying to figure out how to handle things when there isn't a policy or chasing down payment and accepting payment in different ways and tracking it all, it's overwhelming. So that growth and efficiency is something that I think will resonate with a lot of teachers that you have a desire to make change and grow, but it's a little sticky. Like I can't really fit more students in because I'm doing all these other things, right?
Right.
So these were all very frustrating, obviously. We got in contact talking about moving forward and what the studio could look like in your growth. If you remember, where did you first hear about us? We go back a few months. Do you have an idea of how we got in
Yeah.
contact?
Well, I remember I had seen an interview with you on Sam Rothstein, the clarinetist in Indianapolis Symphony, his podcast or
Hmm.
video interview series. And it was like growing a clarinet studio, and it was really interesting because his playlist was like, here's an interview with this symphony clarinet player, here's an interview with this symphony clarinet player, this, and I was like, this is a very different title, and it's caught my eye, and I remember watching it, and I was like, okay, this is a lot of the ideas that you were presenting, especially with school visits and just sort of reaching out to help uh, with the band directors and just sort of serve their program. I thought that was a really interesting idea, and so I sort of stored it in the back of my mind for like half a year. And then when I started adding more students, I thought maybe I should probably look into this to see if I could. It had to be a better way to run a studio.
So that's what we did. I mean, that organic outreach and reaching out to the schools was exactly how we approached building your studio. And we talk a lot, especially when we talk about other growth patterns for other studios. There are other options that we have. Social media, for example, is a great one, especially for like voice teachers and piano teachers, and especially violin teachers can be a really good fit there too. But we're looking at clarinet. As a clarinetist, candidly, it is not easy to just go on social media and find the parents of your clarinet students in a Facebook group. That doesn't really happen. So, not that we don't want to use those things and spread the word a little bit that way, but it's not our bread and butter. So, let's talk about that process for you and what it's been like building the studio, and you've had some really big success. What do you think has established those relationships most efficiently with band directors? Because that's where a lot of your students are coming from.
Right. Yeah. So I think, well, just number one, the most important thing is that to keep in mind is that these band directors, and you can see it on a lot of their websites, the band websites, is if you go into like the resources page, it's like recommended private teachers. There'll be 4 or 5 clarinet teachers, which I think is why parents are not looking to Facebook as much as maybe some other instruments, is because they want to go with whatever the teacher's recommending. And so knowing the band directors and having a really good relationship, I think, is really important
Hmm.
for that. But what I did was, well, we had the school email campaign where it reached out to, I don't know how many, a couple dozen or a few dozen schools in the area, band directors, and offered to do a classroom visit. And I got a lot of really great response from that, actually, more than I could handle. So I haven't followed up on most of them, to be completely honest. But I did visit a few schools, and I, you know, some of them wanted me to do sectionals. Some of them wanted me to talk about efficient practicing with all of their students. Some of them wanted me to take just their more advanced students and talk about preparing for honor band auditions in sort of discussion format. Some of them wanted master class, and I did all of those. And in every situation, the band directors were just super, super grateful
Mm.
to have me there. People are, I think I was a little bit scared initially, like reaching out to all these people because, I was like, oh, I want to teach students, and but they, if you just reach out and say, hey, I'd love to help out in your band program, and again, these were volunteer, all of them were volunteer, and they were just so grateful. And in every situation, I haven't done a single school visit where they didn't say, would you be able to come back and do paid sectionals regularly? Would you be able
Mm.
to come back and teach lessons regularly? And and I have to say I've actually said no to a few and passed them on to friends, which is awesome. It
Yeah,
feels amazing to be able to do that. But if you reach out and you're just trying to give them as much as you can to help their program, I think people really, really feel that, and it's a great way to build a really deep relationship with the program.
absolutely. And what we're looking for too is just a handful so that you're not overwhelmed and overworked, just a handful of really strong relationships. Because obviously,
Mm-hmm.
I think you said you went into what, 5 or 6 schools about?
Yeah, it was 4 or 5. Yeah,
4 or 5. Okay.
yeah.
So 4 or 5 schools, and that's yielded now just since the start of the school year. So in the last 6 weeks, that's yielded a lot of students. I think we just said in the last 6 weeks, since school started at the end of August, you've added 6 students. So
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
is one new registration a week. That's wild. That's fast. But because you have those relationships and you're in front of those students and you're in front of those teachers, they might have that recommendation of 5 or 6 other teachers on their website, which could look intimidating. It could scare you off from reaching out to them. But at the same time, if you're the one that's top of mind because you were just there and you have that relationship with them, it does make sure that things are funneling your way a little bit more. I think a lot of teachers have been teaching for a while. We have that relationship, it gets a little stagnant. If you're not reaching out all the time, you just kind of assume like like a friendship. If it's a long distance friendship, it's like if I haven't heard from them, everything's good.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise they'd reach out. And it's not quite the same in that referral relationship or kind of business networking. If we're not staying in consistent connection and consistent contact with them, we aren't top of mind anymore. We might not be their first referral
Right.
source.
Yeah.
So having those opportunities to go back when possible, of course, is amazing. And if it's too much, then you did the right thing in handing them off. But just having 2, 3 schools that you've got a really good relationship with ongoing is usually more than enough for
Mm-hmm.
a pretty full-time studio. So obviously we talked a lot about adding the students and the fact that we have had growth, but there's been some other changes that we've seen in your studio. So what other areas of your studio management and, financial success have improved in the
Right.
last 4 to 5 months?
Yeah. So when we first started working together, the number one priority, at least for the first few weeks, wasn't finding more students. It was creating a studio policy, learning to use Duet Partner as the studio management website. And the policy was a huge change for me because that included cancellation policy, which was great, which didn't exist before, which is another issue that was very big. Um, but also the tuition and sort of billing situation changed. And so instead of having, so for my old students, instead of having them pay as the lessons came or whatever, we changed them to a proactive monthly billing system where I bill for the amount of lessons scheduled in the next month at the end of the previous month. And then for my new students, I started using the flat rate system, which was amazing. Just keeps everything consistent. It makes it easier for them. It's this auto pay. And for those new students, I also did raise my rates a little bit. So those were the big changes in terms of
Awesome.
just management and studio stuff.
So with the change of the flat rate increase, you've also changed your rates and the rates have increased and it's, I think, by roughly 30%. How has that impacted your enrollment, your studio? I know it is a big change and it can be scary to make a jump like that. What does that feel like now on kind of the back end of that?
Yeah, it was really scary. The first time I met for a consultation with a student and I was going to quote them on the higher rate, I was really nervous because I felt like it wasn't worth the money. Um, it, it's totally fine. I mean, people are totally fine with paying more money. I think it's something just inside of us that thinks that, oh, I can't charge more money. People are going to say no. Um, it's literally never happened in any of my consultations. Just for past self and anybody who's wondering the same thing. Um, Also, I actually met with one of the top clarinet teachers in our area in Northern Virginia yesterday, and we had dinner yesterday. It's like, hey, this guy's a genius, and I just want to learn about how he teaches and how he runs a studio.
Mm.
And one of the funny things, we sat down, and his like the first thing he says, so get to know you, whatever, and then he says, I have one major issue. He said, I hate it when military band clarinet players come and they try to teach for $50 or $60 an hour, low rates because they have another job to sit on, and it drives the whole clarinet teaching market down. So you better not be doing that. And I was like, I changed it. I'm sorry, I was doing it, and it's better now.
No, I'm good. I
And
promise. I'm sorry.
it's a whole, and
Yeah.
it's a whole thing that I didn't even think about before.
Yep.
And so when you raise your rates, you are also helping everybody else out a little bit by not pricing them out. So I think it's important to think about it that way as well.
Absolutely. I think this is something that we actually talked about with Sam on that podcast a little bit too, is
Uh huh.
if the top is charging too low, especially for the area, that there's this like trickle down effect that if the symphony player is only charging 70 an hour,
Mm.
now other teachers are hard pressed to charge more than that. And
Right. Yeah.
it does create this lower pay scheme for everybody else. The other piece of this too is if your students are really serious about it and they want to work with you, your students and their families will find a way to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
I was one of those kids where when I was in high school, I wanted to study with the principal clarinet from the local orchestra, and lessons were $100 an hour. This is like what, 15 or so years ago. And I couldn't afford $100 an hour. That was a lot of money, especially for our market. So I went out and got a job. I went and worked at the local music store. I knew exactly how many hours I had to work on my own every single week to pay for those lessons. We were together for maybe like 4 or 5 months in lessons. And he looked at me one day. He's like, do you have parents? Like, you write your own checks, like you drive yourself. What's the deal? But it was so important to me that I made it happen. Now, it's an extreme example. I certainly don't expect that from my students to make things happen. But if it is important enough, your students and their families absolutely will reorganize finances to make that happen. And if it's not, we have other opportunities and ways to work with them in scholarships. If it's not just a prioritization, but it's an actual financial need, it's a very different situation.
Mm.
But you're right. When it's important, they will pay for it. And your students value you. And in your process of sales, they're understanding and seeing that value. So they're happily paying it. On the, kind of the back end of all of this now, as the business has grown, things are more organized. You've got more consistent income coming in, and we're finding this stability. What other areas of your life have improved as a result of some of these changes?
Wow. I think I just feel very fulfilled, and that's kind of the biggest thing. That's why I like teaching. Get to meet a lot of other teachers, a lot of band directors, a lot of parents, and it's just been great feeling connected to the community. So I think that's the biggest thing for me. Um, Obviously I'm busier, but it's a good busy. I'm not sitting around just like watching TV, and I don't know what else I did before, but it just feels like I'm doing a lot of really things that are important to me that I really enjoy doing, which is really great and feels great.
That's awesome. That is awesome. If you were talking to yourself, maybe even a little bit more than 5 months ago, since it was, you had heard me kind of present before and kind of heard my spiel, you were aware of what we did in that kind of downtime when you were trying to debate, like, when do I reach out, or what are the next steps, or is this something that could be a good fit for me? If you were talking to yourself 6, 7 months ago, what would you want someone in your position then to know now?
One, I think I would want to know, or I would want myself to know that the program works, and reaching out sooner is always better because then you get started sooner. I think I was just sort of dragging my feet at it for a while, but really, I mean, the changes have been so big for my studio and helped organize my life, my teaching life, so much more that I wish I'd done it sooner. And obviously, growing my studio wouldn't have been possible. But I think I'd also want myself to know that it is the thing I liked about the program, and initially I talked to people about this program, and some people are like, "Oh, so Kelly helped you find all these students." I'm like, well, I actually found these students myself. And they're like, "Oh, so what did the program do?" And I think that's a fair question. It was a lot of work, but the
Yeah.
really great thing about it is now I have complete control over everything in my studio, and I'm able to tweak things when they need to be tweaked. I'm able to solve problems that need to be solved. I just feel like I have a lot more resources for finding students, dealing with issues that come up, scheduling issues, payment issues, building relationships with band directors. All that stuff I can just sort of do on my own now, which is the real, I think, value in everything that we've gone over in the last few months.
Absolutely. And honestly, it makes me so thrilled to hear you talk about that because it is a lot of work. It was a lot of work when I built my studio. It's still a lot of work to maintain my studio. Like this is not easy. It's not an overnight thing, of course, but the goal here within our program is empowerment. We don't want this to be something where you need us forever. I mean, the last couple of weeks you've been working a lot more independently in adding students and you've had that growth. You've been adding students on an average of one a week. So this is something where we learn this now, but we apply it forever. And I'm so excited and also so proud that you've had that journey and you found that independence now because that really is the ultimate goal and the ultimate outcome. It doesn't help you if I'm handing you students indefinitely. There's only so many of those that I can give you, and then what? And if you also don't want to be teaching in person or online, and you only want to be teaching in person, which I know most of your studio is in person,
Mm-hmm.
you need to be ingrained in your local area so that you have those connections. And that's really the long-term success of what we're trying to grow. So that you could do this now, and if you ever relocated, then you would have those skills again. That really is the long-term goal of this. So
Right.
I'm thrilled to hear that. One final question for you before we kind of wrap up for the day about the program. Why would you recommend this to somebody else, or who do you think would be the best fit for our program?
Well, the first question, why I would recommend it because I do recommend it because it works. Um, the I don't know how else you would go about trying to build your studio and knowing that it will actually work. So so if you are interested, I think it's just a proven program, and you have a lot of support, which really helps. A lot of resources. Who really anybody who's trying to grow their studio and
Mm.
really enjoys teaching and is willing to spend time and build a studio that they're really proud of and happy with. I think any teacher I think would benefit from it.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you being so open and talking about the work that you've done over the last few months and the growth and the progress that we've had. It's been a ton of fun to work with you on this. And I think something that really stands out, we talk a lot about ideal students, and you've been more than an ideal client. And the fact that we just followed the process and the goal is for it to be really, duplicatable so that you can just take what I've done, what other teachers have done, and just do that yourself. And you absolutely did the things that I did to build my studio. And you were, really meticulous in following that process. And that coachability and that willingness to learn, ask questions, I also think has been a huge reason that you've been so successful. You really came ready to make moves and make changes. And we made a lot of big changes. So it would have been really easy for you to get, a little anxious about that or kind of shut down because it was a lot, especially in the first few weeks. We kind of ripped the whole thing apart before we put it back together. So thank you for, being with us in that process and being game for that because I'm excited to hear the progress now. But it took a lot of growth and learning from you to get there. And this is 100% your work. And I'm really excited about the growth that you've had. So congratulations.
Yeah,
On the
thank you.
chance that someone wanted to learn more about you or find out about your studio, where could they find you on the internet right now?
Oh geez. Well, if you look at chazsonota.com, that'll take you to my Duet Partner website, which is my studio
Nice.
management website. That's
Perfect.
probably the easiest
Perfect.
way.
Awesome. And Chaz, again, thank you so much for sharing and for being so open about this process and what you've been working on lately. I also really wanted to say thank you to everyone that listened to this. I know it's a lot of information to digest and there's a lot here, but Chaz gave some really good kind of step-by-step instructions on what's worked for him. So I hope that this helps. And again, thank you so much for your time, for listening, and for participating today and sharing, Chaz. Thanks again.
Thank you.